Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 541 for July 3rd, 2023, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Thanks for joining us this week, everybody. It is that time of the year. We are halfway done. It's hard to believe.
I thought you were going to say America's birthday. It's that time of year, at least close to when we're recording this.
Yeah, it is close to America's birthday. However, a lot of people not celebrating July 4th as they did last year, so
I feel like it might be a repetitive
leave that
thing.
one alone.
Yeah. I will admit, while I'm not celebrating the holiday, I am celebrating at the very least our mid-year report, celebrating the movies of 2023 thus far. So I do have a nice beer in hand, and I'm trying to showcase the InSession Film logo, these great glasses that you gifted with me, JD, which I really appreciated.
Yeah.
So I had to show some love to InSession Film here with this special episode we're doing.
Do love that. Always certainly wish that I had the opportunity and the time to indulge with you. I will say this.
It's late at night. You don't drink late at night anymore.
I don't. No. If anything, I'm drinking coffee. We'll get to that later. But regardless of how you feel about July 4th in America and all of its shenanigans, we did take our sons over to their grandparents tonight.
Okay.
And they released some fireworks and we're having a lot of fun and we had sparklers and all that sort of stuff. However, the best part of it was that it was the first time Andrew got to experience all of this.
Oh,
obviously.
yeah. I didn't even think about that.
And so, we weren't sure if he could handle the noise, so we kept him inside right by the door, which is a glass door, so you could see right through it and everything. Yeah. And we had him in this little bouncer so he could basically stand upright but have a bunch of support. And he was utterly mesmerized the entire time.
He
loved
cute.
it.
It is so cute.
It is adorable. It was absolutely incredible. I'll have to see if I can post some video of it because he was entranced.
Now, did you keep him inside the whole time, or did you end up bringing him outside when you realized that maybe he seems to be enjoying this quite a bit?
Well, we brought him outside once all the noise dissipated. So once the larger fireworks were done and it wasn't quite as noisy, because we didn't know if he would handle the noise all that well, if it would scare him. And when he was inside, the door muffled it enough that it really wasn't all that loud. And he loved it. I mean, as I noted. So, yeah, he was having a great time. We did take him outside to enjoy the sparklers, like to see everyone playing with the sparklers and stuff. And,
that's always a great warm-up, right? That's always a great warm-up round, the sparklers, to get to get children introduced to what fireworks can ultimately do. I feel like, at least in my upbringing, when I was a kid, I remember sparklers being kind of the introduction to my fireworks experience. And I'm not saying that I don't think that's the case for everyone, but it was for me. So I can certainly relate to what you're talking about there.
Yeah. I mean, sparklers make sense as an introduction. However, we did it the opposite. Like they lit the main fireworks first, which is what he experienced through the door and loved. We didn't do the sparklers until after the madness was over. So
but you at least you had a literal wall. You had a barrier between Andrew and whatever noise was happening outside to sort of like warm him up to what this could potentially be.
Yeah, because the noise factor is still, I'm uncertain about that. But anyway, the moral of the story is he loved it, and I'm sure we'll do more tomorrow, which is, as we're recording this, tomorrow is actually July 4th. Yeah. By the time you are all hearing this, you've probably already finished your July 4th.
It might be July 8th.
Or your experience. Yeah. So we hope that everyone had a great time and that you still have 10 fingers and toes. So that is.
Gosh. Oh, man, that brings back memories. Yeah, I've definitely burned myself on fireworks before. It's another discussion for another time.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously with this week's episode, we're going to get into our mid-year report. which equates to us talking about the year as a whole and primarily giving our top 5 movies of 2023 so far. However, before we do, we need a pseudo sequel to last week's episode because there's been a couple of things that have
The landscape
happened.
of movies right now. I mean, there's always something to talk about. Unfortunately, there's always something to talk about now.
And we gave Warner Brothers a hard time last week. Very deserved. It was all warranted.
Oh yeah, we're not pulling back on that.
But this week it is Disney's turn because there was a movie they released on Disney Plus last month called Crater. May 12th, I believe, was the date to be specifically. It is July 3rd, as I noted, and they are taking that movie off Disney Plus. It didn't last a month, and they're like, "No, we're taking this away from you all." And it just is another one of those things. It's an extension of what we talked about last week in terms of digital media and how worrisome, film preservation is at the moment. I saw a lot of tweets, a lot in the social media discourse as it relates to pirating. And you know what? At this point, it's starting, I'm starting to come around on why pirating is necessary. I've always been anti-pirating.
Wow, yeah. That is a dangerous thing to say on a live podcast like this.
Look, I am not, and look, if the FBI is listening, I take that back.
Big brother,
I take it back.
Please take this with a very small grain of salt.
But, I saw some comments, and I'm sure many of it was made in jest, but I think there's also sincerity to it, because if not for these sites that are pirating these movies as soon as they become available, where else can you see them? Film preservation has become such a challenge that the only way to watch a lot of these movies is through Jack Sparrowing them.
Yeah, well, it's because the ownership is very specific with these movies, right? So by ownership standards, does that mean a movie like Crater can't be rented on something like Prime, for instance? I don't know. I don't know if it'll even be available in that type of capacity. So that's what makes it scary. Now, I'll be honest. I didn't really know much about this movie at all. I think the marketing was pretty much non-existent, which, that's kind of more of a slap on the wrist for Disney for not being able to push a movie like this. And again, I don't know if it's any good. Apparently, from what I'm seeing, the critical reviews from an aggregator standpoint are not that bad. They're actually like pretty decent. And looking at it, let's see, the filmmaker here, Kyle Patrick Alvarez. He directed the movie, the Stafford Prison Experiment. Remember that movie that we talked about years ago? That was actually a pretty effective movie.
Yeah.
So we know it has a talented filmmaker behind the film. So it's unfortunate to see something like this happen. And it begs the question, where the heck's it going to go? For those of us that may be curious about it or don't know anything about it, it's going to become a forgotten film before a film really earns that status. It doesn't, the fact that a movie gets forgotten and it doesn't take long for that to happen, that's a scary thought. And I feel like that could happen here.
It is scary. And look, I understand that Crater is a small movie on Disney Plus, and as you noted, there wasn't much marketing behind it. It wasn't a priority for Disney. But what's to stop them from doing that to the Indiana Jones catalog? What's Star Wars?
Well, let's look at it with properties that are comparable to something like Crater, because Crater is a Disney Plus exclusive, right? So is this going to happen to something like Peter Pan and Wendy, for instance?
Yeah,
which a film I did not love, but it's a filmmaker that I think is one of the best working today, and to have something like that on your resume is a sad thing, right? That you directed a film and a streaming platform decided that it would become forgotten before it had a chance to really, have any type of run. There are some great movies that discovered life and classic status because of the home video craze back in the 90s and even early 2000s. And that time is gone now because of situations like this.
Absolutely. And, as we were talking about last week, and this has been a topic of conversation for some time now with
Yeah.
these large Hollywood studios, if they're going to pull these TV shows, these movies, and this isn't the first time Disney, they got in hot water for this a few months ago, right? When they pulled Willow and all that stuff from Disney Plus as well.
Yeah.
So, this is just the latest. The timing of it is what's interesting to me, because we just got done talking about the dubiousness of where Hollywood is last week on the show, and then here they are.
It's like every single week, and there's new evidence to support that conversation.
Exactly. That's, I guess, more of what it is. But you're right.
Yeah.
And as we noted last week on the show as well, if digital media is, reigning supreme right now, and it's harder to find all these movies like physically, that's where, again, the pirating situation becomes all the more complex. And again, I'm not saying that you should go out and Jack Sparrow these movies, but I am saying I understand it. Because how else can you see them? And look, it's Crater you might not have sought out, but there will be movies like or TV shows. Like if I wanted to watch Willow, the only way for me to do that is to get my my little pirate hat on.
Things
Go
need to
sailing
change.
the Black Seas.
Things need to change. And that's not to say that these are properties that are always worth seeking out. Some of them might not be very good, but that's up to the consumer to decide, right? And the fact that we have these corporations that are deciding what's worth consuming is an even scarier thought, right? Because a lot of these people who are making these calls, they're not necessarily creative people. They're more business-minded people. And you need people like that in the film and television business. Like you need that, but it needs to be counterbalanced by those who can actually speak maybe from an audience perspective. So there is a middle ground there. And I feel like that middle ground is sorely missing when choices like this happen, because I don't know, I might decide to watch Crater before it leaves Disney Plus and think this is actually a really good movie. I would actually recommend it to people. And then it becomes even more unfortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe that's what they're banking on, is that sense of urgency. But
maybe this is a marketing strategy after all, which if it is,
it shouldn't come down to that.
It didn't come down to that. That's just crass.
I agree. It's certainly not taking care of the consumer, and it's certainly not respectful toward the artists that worked on these various projects.
Agreed.
Moving on to another film here real fast, because there was an animated film that came out this last weekend, and we talked quite a bit about Pixar on last week's show. This is a DreamWorks film. They had a new film out over the weekend called Teenage Kraken that grossed $5.2 million domestically, which is by far their worst opening ever.
That is basically the equivalent of a nickel.
That's not good. I mean, and we are post, 2020, 2021, like when COVID was at its height. Like we're on the other side of that. And and again, I understand why it grossed 5.2 million, because there was no marketing for that film aside from a trailer they released online.
Yeah,
and maybe you saw it in a theater. Maybe.
Well, that's the point I was going to bring up, and we sort of talked about that with Elemental a little bit, right? The marketing seemed kind of bare for both of these movies, didn't it? It's honestly a big thing. Obviously marketing costs a lot of money. Like that definitely adds to the budgetary constraints when it comes to the release strategy of any movie. But when that is limited, you're going to see the effect of that, a negative effect on that, when the product is actually released. And that's, I think, another case here with this movie here. Is the limited marketing, I think, just didn't create enough early word of mouth in the form of curiosity to see if we want to actually see this thing. So audiences didn't even go to it.
And according to this, the budget was $70 million. Wow. So say what you will about the animation, the storytelling, what the trailer presented the film to be. And look, based off the trailer, it seemed like a pretty standard DreamWorks animated movie. $13 million worldwide on a $70 million budget.
Do these people even know how to calculate net present value? I mean, it's like, because, okay, in a situation like this, of course it's going to lose money. Okay, it cost $70 million. Or at least the budget was $70 million in that regard. Okay, but what do you want to add to that from a budgetary standpoint when it comes to marketing? And how could that then eventually offset what you could gain in the process? Because, of course, it's going to cost more to market it, but there could be a huge internal rate of return when you do that. And that's what I feel like these corporations are not considering. It's like, it's a basic finance formula. And where's the math here?
I don't know.
It's like, so confusing.
If you're going to commit to $70 million, if you are greenlighting this project saying, yes, we feel like this is a movie we need to move forward with.
Mm-hmm.
And you would think there would be some thought and discussion put into that.
Yeah.
You're committing $70 million to this. You would think that they would put some marketing behind it. We have to get people to go see this.
And it could
has to be a conversation.
It could even be different kinds of marketing. They could have seen this movie at the time and think, you know what, this might be a misfire as far as what we feel about the product. You know, how can we market this one differently rather than just throw it in theaters and get it away from us? And
I guess
at that point, you might as well just do what Warner Brothers did to Batgirl and just write it off.
Well, that's the thing. But if you're greenlighting these movies, you would think they're not greenlighting them to just write it off as a tax issue.
Yeah.
Even if you think that it's going to be a loss, okay, the execution wasn't there. We don't think it's going to get 70 million, but let's try to get as much of that back as possible.
Right.
They put no effort in. 5.2 million domestically. That is.
Like I said, it's a nickel. It's a nickel.
Here's the other thing about that, though, right? So if we were to swing the pendulum from Teenage Kraken to the other extreme, this is where you get Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, a film that had a $350 million budget plus marketing. You know, we noted this at the end of our conversation. If you haven't heard our podcast review of this, it should be up by the time this episode goes live.
Yeah.
And we talked about it at the end of that conversation as well. You know, it grossed 150 million-ish, give or take, in its opening weekend, which isn't great, but it's not the worst either. Like that, those are fine opening numbers by today's standards.
Yeah.
But when it costs $350 million to make plus marketing, that's a situation we have ourselves in.
When it's also a an Indiana Jones movie, you kind of think when it has that kind of legendary status, even in its title, you would think it might do better than that. So there, I guess there is like a sort of like circumstantial problem there too that we can also talk about. But yeah, the disparity there between its budget and what it made opening weekend certainly does lend itself to some concern. Now, I mean, maybe audiences pick up on it. Maybe it'll earn that back in like 3 or 4 weeks. Maybe a month or so from now, we'll see, okay, a different conversation can be had. But
yeah,
that doesn't really happen for movies like this that are meant to be immediate responses, right?
Yeah.
And that makes it kind of a concerning one for sure.
Yeah, and this isn't an Indiana Jones problem. This is a larger Hollywood problem because the same situation goes for, a lot of these superhero movies. James Cameron talked about how The Way of Water had to make $2 billion to make back its money, which is wild.
But
or $1.5 billion. I think he knows how to $1.5 billion, but still,
he knows how to market his movies. That it's never a problem for him. So he ends up getting to that point anyway.
But still, to have to make $1.5 billion just to get back to zero is insane. Yeah. And I don't know what it is that's driving those costs. It simply could be the technology and I don't know. It's probably all of the above. It's everything that
Or
goes
the
into
fact that
making
it
a
took like
movie,
40
but-
years to make, maybe.
Well, again, because this is a larger Hollywood issue. This isn't a
Yeah.
James Cameron issue or an Indiana
Yeah.
Jones or a Flash issue. Like these movies just cost way too much to make.
Yeah.
They have to figure out a way to get that number drastically down. So that way, when you make $150 million in your opening weekend, you're like, okay, we're fine. We're
Yeah.
good. And it's Indiana Jones. You think it's at least going to have some legs. Maybe it can get up to 350-ish.
Do you think
maybe?
part of that problem is just the oversaturation of product these days? Because remember, let's think about this. Like, what was it, 8 years ago when Star Wars The Force Awakens came out, which was a huge hit. But that's a film that really took its time to, aesthetically please us, right? And I think in doing so, it was an expensive movie. Not, don't get me wrong, but the movie allowed those expenses to breathe and take its time to recuperate that, right? And when I say oversaturation, I don't mean like oversaturation of a particular genre or a particular movement, but I mean, these studios are putting out so much content all over the place now that there's so many different monetary hands in different cookie jars trying to pay each other. And I think that just creates this like cross-contamination of revenue streams and how you can actually get these different groups paid for the work that they're doing, that there's no way to be able to do this efficiently and inexpensively. Maybe that's part of the problem too, is that there's just so much content that they're dedicating themselves to.
And maybe that's why, and this is just a theory, I don't know how much credence there is to this, but we see Tom Cruise and the Barbie cast, and who knows, maybe Oppenheimer will show up at all of this as well. But like you see these movies cross promoting each other.
It's not a bad idea. It really isn't.
And to me, that is indicative of like during COVID, when we needed a vaccine, in order for it to come out as quickly as it did, it took these competitor companies colliding together and using their scientists and their data and everything. So that way they collaborated to get this vaccine out. So that way we could get back to our normal lives. In a normal situation, it's the antithesis of that, right? It's, you're doing everything you can to drown your competitor. But when the stakes are that dire, everyone came together.
This reminds me a lot of you make a great point. It takes
that's my that's what I'm trying to say. Is the same thing's really happening here.
But think of it this way: it's like it depends on the market that you're trying to serve. There are times when business competition is a necessary driving force for a competitive advantage, depending on what that business is. But if it's multiple businesses serving the same kind of thing, let's say for instance, like healthcare, for instance, that type of competition is very much like it's kind of unwarranted because it's meant to serve and protect people. So to compete against each other in that way is kind of a like unethical thing. But in the case of like movies, if you start to compete with each other in the same way, all of a sudden that sense of drowning the other competition out, it creates this problem that's just serving the larger issue. Then, I mean, the point is that we just need people to go and see movies. It doesn't really matter who comes out on top. It's the same reason why George Lucas and Spielberg would congratulate each other when E.T. would beat Star Wars back in 1982.
Sure,
it's like it's a healthy form of respect that just gets people to appreciate the single product at hand, and that is movies. That's what matters.
Absolutely.
Right there.
And I do think from Tom Cruise's perspective, because this isn't the first time he's done this, right? He is a true fan and student of cinema.
Yeah.
He loves it. And he wants to see it thrive and he wants to see it succeed, right? Like he had that whole video that went viral when he went to see Tenet in 2020. I'm going to see this in a theater. I'm going to make this happen.
I remember an interview I think he did on, who is it? May have been David Letterman when he was still hosting The Late Show. Cruise said that he always makes an effort to try and watch a movie a day.
Yes.
And that's
he loves it. Yeah.
He loves it. Absolutely. And I respect that.
He's a film nerd through and through, and you gotta love the man for that.
Mm-hmm.
And he knows that in order for the industry to thrive, it can't just be Top Guns and Mission Impossibles that are doing the heavy lifting. He knows, he understands that Nolan has to do well, that Barbie has to succeed, because all these films are coming out in July. There will be a crossing of the streams in some way, because you do hope that these films have legs as they go.
Yeah.
Even if Dead Reckoning comes out, I think, before Barbie and Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Like a week or two before. But they're going to butt heads in some ways, right? Like there was a whole thing where Tom Cruise wanted to get Mission Impossible in IMAX, and that was a struggle because Oppenheimer had bought them all out.
Yeah.
So
which is a valid concern to have, but the point is, and what Cruise is trying to do is not just fight for the IMAX experience for Dead Reckoning alone. He wants all of these movies to do well.
And that's my point. And that's where I was trying to get with all of this is that, he, despite the hurdles he had for his own movie, at the end of the day, that's not stopping him from promoting Oppenheimer and Barbie and that whole cool thing that he did that then Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie reverberated back, which I thought was a really cool gesture. Like to see these films from different studios. It's not like all three of these are coming from the same studio. They're not. Yeah, they're coming from
makes it more ironic
studios.
That if the executives at those respective studios were pissed off that they did that, I'd say good. It's
good. Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
because again, are the stakes as high as it was with getting a vaccine out at the height of COVID? No. However,
different situation.
But it's not as if the box office isn't vulnerable still. It is, and we've seen a lot of flops lately. A lot of films that have struggled to make ends meet, so to speak. And I think right now they're starting to see, we need the success of an Avatar, of a Top Gun Maverick again. And hopefully these three films will be able to carry theaters forward and build up some momentum again as we get into the fall. Because the last 2 months haven't been too great. There's been a couple, like Guardians did well. Across the Spider-Verse did very good.
Yeah.
But, Transformers, Indiana Jones, The Flash, name them. They've all struggled. And Elemental, they've struggled mightily. So
coincidentally, I think the films that most people, not everyone, but most people would seem to suggest were the better movies are the ones that are doing better.
Well, and we talked about that a lot last
JD,
so,
let them make good movies.
Make good
let
movies.
Them eat cake.
Exactly. That 100%. That's all that this comes down to for me.
Yeah.
But I do love. I love to see it. I love to see the cross promotion. We want movies to succeed. I'm going to promote these other movies, even though they're not mine.
That's why my answer on Twitter. On Twitter, every time I see one of those, you have one choice. What are you seeing on July 21st? Oppenheimer or Barbie? You only have one choice. My response is, I'm seeing both. Screw your rules. I'm seeing both. And I think everyone should.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. With that, let's go ahead and transition to the year that is 2023. And we'll be a little bit more optimistic in this conversation because the state of cinema, if you go down that rabbit hole, it's dubious. But as this conversation may prove, there's been some great movies to come out in 2023. Yeah. Before we get to our top 5, though, Brendan, do you have any thoughts on the year so far as it relates to the film themselves?
Yeah, the films themselves, rather than the representation of those films from a financial standpoint, from I guess from a representation of how well movies are doing generally. That's the conversation we just had. We don't have to regurgitate that. I think the year 2023 has been, I think it's been okay. But I say this with a bit of a asterisk of many of them, actually, because I will admit I've only seen about 30 to 31 new films from this year. Okay. There are a lot that I still haven't had a chance to see, a lot of blind spots still, and I do want to make note of a few of them offhand, just to kind of clear the air and make our listeners aware of some of the things they just haven't had a chance to see. So movies like, Paul Schrader's Master Gardener, or there's a movie on Hulu called Rye Lane. Haven't seen that yet. Or 1001, Beau is Afraid, Magic Mike's Last Dance, No Hard Feelings. There's a small handful of films that I know there have been positive responses for that I just haven't had a chance to see yet. So even with that said, I overall like 2023 thus far. At the very least, with my top 5 that we'll talk about, I really do feel pretty passionate about the 5 that I'm going to get into with my top 5 of the year thus far. But I mean, I feel like we say this almost every year, right, JD? Every time we get to a mid-year report, we may find ourselves feeling, kind of like a wavering thumbs up on the year as far as quality is concerned. But we always know that heavy hitters are saved for the back end of the year, especially the fall season and the winter season. So this is not a representation of what we think the year is going to do in the long run. I think it could end up still being a great year given what we know is still going to come out. But from what I've seen and the quality of films that I've seen, of the 30 or so films I've seen, I think it's been okay. I've loved about maybe 6 or 7 of them, with the rest kind of veering towards good to bad. I'll simply say that.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you in the sense that I think the year on the whole has been okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not necessarily dubious about the rest of the year because we've certainly been in this position before where the first half of the year was maybe a little middling, but by the end of the year, it turned out to be quite the monster of a year.
Yep.
And also, I think this conversation will always be spoiled for me because of last year, at least moving forward, because when we did this exercise for 2022, my top 5 consisted of Everything Everywhere All at Once, Top Gun Maverick, After Yang, The Northman, and Fire of Love. That top 4 ended up in my top 10 of the year.
I was going to say. So does that mean 2022 is a terrible year for movies?
No, I think it was a deep, rich year.
Yeah.
I think it was just way more consistent than usual. Like the first half of last year had some incredible bangers. Some phenomenal movies that come out early on.
We normally see this scoop effect when it comes to quality with any year. It's like it starts off at a certain point, gets better, maybe scoops down, then gets really good. But last year, you're right, was kind of like this steady incline for the entire year in some way. I mean, if you average it out, I mean, some months certainly better than others, but if you create like a trend line between it all, it was kind of on this consistent upward trend with many of those heavy hitters earlier than usual, which was really interesting.
It was very interesting. And I look at my list here, I don't foresee that being the same thing. Again, now that said, there are a few here, at least 2, maybe 3, that I do think has a great chance to make my top 10 at the end of the year. Now, that is so premature. I have no idea. But I envision a world where that's very possible.
Oh,
absolutely.
I'm with you. I will say this. Looking at my 5 right now that we're going to talk about, I don't want to place bets because I'm too risk averse, but if I were a betting man, I would say my top 4 at the very least will probably end up in my top 20 by the end of the year.
Yeah.
I really like these top 4 at the very least. That number 5 spot's kind of, I don't want to say a placeholder, but it's kind of the one that's the most fluctuating at this point. But those 4 are very solid. Those are great movies that we're going to talk about, I think.
Yeah, my top 3, I think, has a really great chance to be in my 5 and or my 10 at the end of the year, or at the very least, as you're talking about, that top 20. As far as the rest of these, it'll depend on how the rest of the year plays out, and I'm not really quite sure. But given what we know is coming out in the back half of the year, I suspect that this list is going to change drastically.
Okay.
Yeah. And I am looking forward to that. But That is to say, I think right now the year on the whole has been a little uneven for me, a little middling, but
Yeah.
top heavy, because those at the
Actually,
tip of
yeah.
the spear are incredible.
Actually,
Incredible movies.
I think top heavy is a really great term for this because I look at my letterbox ratings for a lot of these movies. I have very little 4 out of 5 star ratings on here. I have 4 or 5 4.5s out of 5, and the rest are all at least like 3 out of 5 or less. It's like
There you go. Yeah.
yeah. So there you go. It's kind of like, again, it's like this weird scoop that's going on here.
Yeah, for sure. And my list, I think, is a little deeper than that, but I've seen more than you at this point. So
Yeah, how many have you seen at this point?
I haven't done the math. I'm not really too sure, but I know, looking on my list, there are a few that I know you haven't seen. That I really liked. I have some blind spots as well. Beau is Afraid is the big one, because I love Ari Aster and I love Joaquin Phoenix, but that film came out as my son was born, and it hasn't become
couldn't make time
available
for
yet.
a 3-hour movie.
Well,
so
it hasn't really become available yet unless I buy it digitally for $20, which, as we noted earlier, probably not a great investment. So
yeah, and given some of the things that I've heard potentially happens in that movie, it's not necessarily one that I'm willing to own just yet, unless I know I like the movie. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So and yeah, I haven't felt compelled to go and buy a physical copy of it, which is what I would do if I wanted to own it. But I don't know at this point. So I have to wait
Makes sense.
for that to become more accessible before I can really give that one a go. And of course, there's a couple of foreign films and some indies that are on my list that I just haven't had a chance to get to quite yet. But
Same, but I'm looking forward to them all. So yeah,
but I feel like
it's a work in progress list for us. It might be a little incomplete, but hopefully we get to share some movies that our listeners have been thinking about checking out. Maybe they haven't had a chance to check them out yet. Although, I mean, I don't know how your list looks, JD, but I will say with mine, not many surprises. I feel like there are a lot of consensus picks this year that will echo a little bit during this conversation.
okay, well, with that, let's get into it. What do you have at your number 5?
So right now, my number 5 is this might be my biggest outlier of the films on my list, or maybe the most under the radar film. And I don't know if you've seen this one yet. At least I don't recall seeing a rating or a thought from you on Letterboxd or anything, but it's the new film from Nicole Hofstetter, You Hurt My Feelings.
No, that's one that's on my list. I haven't had a chance to see that yet. Yeah.
I only caught up with this one a few days ago, and I really enjoyed it. It stars Julie Louis-Dreyfus, Tobias Menzies, as well as a few others. And the plot synopsis reads, at least here on Letterboxd, a novelist's long-standing marriage is suddenly upended when she overhears her husband giving his honest reaction to her latest book. And that's a fair synopsis, although it extends beyond just those two characters. It extends to their son, it extends to her own sister and that sister's husband, who is this actor, and kind of gets into this really interesting notion about how the truth really hurts sometimes, and how you're willing to communicate that with your family and friends in a way that's helpful without hurting their feelings, as the title seems to suggest. So I think it's a really interesting psychological study that's happening here. That's also very funny, and it's a very funny movie.
Okay.
And this is Nicole Hofstetter who directed this, who also directed. You remember the movie Enough Said with Julie Dreyfus and James Gandolfini?
Oh yeah.
She was also one of the co-writers on Can You Ever Forgive Me, the Marielle Heller film with Melissa McCarthy, which I really liked as well. So it has a lot of similarities with those films tonally, but really does a good job getting you to think about, this fine line between honesty and support for your loved ones, right? And if you're ever, kind of crossing that line too much by being too supportive to the point that you're being dishonest. And I think the film raises a lot of interesting questions and invites audiences into those conversations that I found really interesting. So you haven't seen it yet, JD. I really urge you to check it out. I think you'll at least appreciate what the film is suggesting topically. But I do think it's a very good film. I really liked it.
Yeah, that's one that's on my list to see. I just sadly haven't got a chance to get to that one yet, but I'll probably get to that within the next week or so because it is quite high on my list at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
For my number 5, I guess we'll continue this trend because I believe you noted this is one of those blind spots for you.
I bet I have a guess of which one this is. Is this Master Gardener that you're going to get into?
Oh no!
Oh
Just
no!
wait. Just
Oh,
wait.
just wait. Just wait.
Just wait. This is Rain Allen Miller's debut film, Rye Lane,
Oh, okay. Yeah, not on my
starring
list.
David Johnson and Vivian Opara. This is such a delightful romantic comedy, and I think what's really great about it is that it's oddly in the vein of what we talked about, or what our audience will hear very soon in our past lives review, which is recorded. It's just not out as of the time we are recording this.
Mm-hmm.
But when you listen to that conversation, this will make a lot more sense. But in terms of that ethos of walking and talking, spending time with someone, the Before trilogy is certainly, iconic in that way as well.
Gotcha.
This takes that formula, but it is executed in such a very different way. There's a vibrancy to this film. It's very funny. The premise of this simply surrounds these two characters, and Dom and Yaz, played by Johnson and Opara respectively. They're coming off of these bad breakups. They meet in a bathroom. In fact, the opening shot of this film is quite stunning. It's this
Man.
ambitious overhead shot that goes from stall to stall to stall in this bathroom, and eventually it ends on Dom as he's crying over this breakup. And while that sounds more heartbreaking than what it actually is, it's actually a pretty striking moment that ends in this comedic way when he runs into Yas in the bathroom. And as we get to know her more as well, we get to learn her story and her relationship history and this breakup that she's coming off the heels of as well. And as they talk and they form this bond, like it is impossible not to fall under the spell of this movie. It is so absurdly charming. It is hilarious. It's awkward, but not overly awkward. The tension finds that middle ground perfectly. But maybe the best attribute to this film is that while it does eventually fall into some formulaic traps, primarily from a plotting perspective, some of the comedic gags become a little absurd, but in a fun, goofy way that is effective for this film and that walking and talking style that this film adopts. But the best thing about it, I think, this is also credit to the writing and directing, but also our central performances here. And I feel like the best comedies, Richard Linklater is a master at this as well. That while you're invoking a lot of humor, sometimes a little absurd, the film doesn't forget humanity in it all as well. Like there's a couple of really great moments here where these characters get to reflect on this somber tone and kind of where they are and why and how these characters are able to process that grief and process that emotion through each other in these unexpected ways. And at times that's actually very charming and a little humorous, but I love how the film is able to get to this human element inside of that comedy. And this film does that brilliantly. So as funny as it is, as charming and quaint as it is, it does such a great job of tapping into this human element that I think is unexpected, and also a sense of place in all of that as well, because Rye Lane invokes a certain part of London, South London, I think specifically, if I'm correct on that.
Oh, interesting.
And so it certainly invokes a sense of place in that as well. So it's the human element inside this specific setting and what that means for these characters as they find a little bit of closure and a little bit of healing in each other, and the parallels with both of those characters along the way. So I really liked it a lot. I urge people to go and check it out. Ryan Lane. I believe this is on Hulu, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I did the research to try and prep for this specific episode by doing a bunch of catch up at the last minute. I told you that, I think offline, JD, that I was going to try and use the day to do some catch up leading up to our conversation here. And honestly, Rye Lane was going to be the next film I watched right before recording this right now, but I realized I only had about an hour before we got on the podcast. And the movie is it's short. It's 82 minutes long, if I'm not mistaken.
That's also the brilliance of
it.
Yes.
Which means by the time we're done recording here, I might just watch it before I go to bed.
There you go. Yeah.
To see if I agree with your takes on this. I'm sure I will. We tend to think a lot alike, so I'm sure I'm going to like this movie. But it is sadly one I didn't get a chance to watch before this specific episode we're doing now. But what you're describing there sounds like it's very much up my alley.
Yeah.
Sounds great. I'll transition to my number 4. I would be pretty surprised if my number 4 is not somewhere on your list. At the very least, I think this is probably somewhere in your 6 or 7 if it doesn't quite make your top 5. I'm going with John Wick Chapter 4 for my number 4. Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
Here we go. The smirk. Okay. I don't know what that means, but I'm going to roll with it. Coincidentally putting number 4, chapter 4 at number 4, I guess. I talked about this quite a bit, at least when I posted my Letterboxd thoughts for this movie. I like all of the John Wick movies. I think they're all really great.
I agree.
They're really great in their own way. My ranking of them might be a bit controversial, considering that I think Chapter 3 is my least favorite of them all.
My favorite.
Yeah, I like that one
and
a lot.
I think that's controversial. Like I feel like I'm alone in that as well.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe
3 is a weird film, I guess.
It is a weird film. Yeah, I think structurally it's just kind of a strange film, but Chapter 4 took me back to the emotional resonance of the original film, the first film from, what was that, 2014? Did that came? I totally forget what year that came out. This has been running almost a decade. I can't believe that.
Pretty wild.
But I do think this is the best of the 4. It's the best of the 4 for me, which is interesting considering it's a nearly 3-hour film. And I think what I love most about it is it kind of abandons the fist in the air violence is awesome fetishism that I just felt from Chapter 3, which again, more of a me thing, less on the movie itself. But it really has a lot of interesting and nuanced ideas on its mind. I feel like Chad Stileski is playing with varying tropes here from classic cinema. He's done that a lot with these movies, paying homage to Buster Keaton and how that opens up. I think that was Chapter 3. It opens up with an actual reel from Buster Keaton, if I'm not mistaken. But John Wick Chapter 4 reminded me a lot of Lawrence of Arabia, for instance. It also reminded me a lot of classic samurai films, kind of in the vein of Akira Kurosawa. So it wears its influences on its sleeve in a very classical way, but has a real human undercurrent to it that I think really is earned. I think it's a very poetic action movie, which is a rare thing to say for a movie that is this gratuitously violent at times. But I think where it goes in the end and how poignant it is for John himself and what he's fighting for and what he realizes that he has lost and can't gain back once again, and how tragic of a notion that is, I think it crystallizes really well. So as far as action films are concerned, I think this is the one to beat. Mission Impossible might do it. I love that franchise, but I think Chapter 4, John Wick Chapter 4 specifically, is the I think so far that is going to be the action film standard for 2023. I think this is the one to really hold that. I think it's really good.
Yeah, I do quite like John Wick 4 as well. This currently sits at number 6 on my list. So it's just outside my top 5.
Okay.
I went back and forth between this and Rye Lane, and honestly, and not just because of this specific conversation, but because we've seen a lot of top 5, top 10 lists of the year so far, and John Wick is heavily represented on a lot of other people's lists that I decided, you know what, I'll just keep this at number 6 so I can highlight Rye Lane instead,
which is fair
on less list.
Which is fair, yeah. I couldn't separate my love for it. Like I said, my top 4 are the ones that I could see ending up in my top 20. So it's like I have to
Yeah.
talk about them because I think they could still hold a place somewhere in my top 20 by the end of the year.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to revisit this. It might be a little bit of a Mad Max Fury Road situation for me when we get to the end of the year, and a rewatch might convince me in terms of that top 20. Now, don't get me wrong, I really like this film a lot. In fact, for the disparity we have on this franchise, and I still think that John Wick 3 is my favorite of them.
Uh-huh.
I think it is actually really well structured. I don't think its tone and violence is any different than the others.
I think it's a comedy.
And I don't think it's any different than the others. And I think it has the best action sequence with the dogs. That's
a great sequence. That is a great sequence.
Freaking incredible. It is.
Yeah.
It is so good. In fact, I want a spin-off with Sophia and those dogs. If we don't get that, I'll be severely disappointed.
Well, I'd rather get that than John Wick Chapter 5. So we'll make that happen.
Unless it's the idea, and I've seen this a couple of times, and I do love it, that it's of John Wick in the underworld, and he has to kill his way through hell to get to heaven to reunite with his wife and dog. If it goes that route, I'm all in. Like, yes.
I have not heard that theory.
Oh, I've seen that a couple of times on social media.
Man, I must have been distancing myself from Twitter because I don't want to reach my 600 tweets a day limit. So
yeah, no, I don't blame you. You only
okay,
get
now
600
I want John Wick Chapter 5 if that's going to be the story.
Yeah.
Okay,
I've seen that a couple of times. I love that idea. So if they go the supernatural route in that regard, I'm all in. Other than that, yes, give me Sophia and the dogs. I love John Wick Chapter 3. Now, that said, while 3 might be my favorite, I think there's an argument to be made, and I very much do concur with the idea that 4 is probably the best of them. When you consider everything you talked about there in terms of the action, how it's choreographed, the adrenaline of it all, Keanu Reeves, the poignancy of it, like how it all crystallizes and ends. Like there's a subtle pathos to that film that I did not expect.
It might be the moodiest. It might be the moodiest of the 4, which I really appreciate about it.
And you know how I am with closure. This is all about John Wick getting closure.
You got to make those shirts. You got to make those shirts.
I got to get,
InSession Film equals shirts. Closure or something like that.
Yeah. So I do really like 4 quite a bit. Don't get me wrong. And a rewatch may cement it as one of the 20 films for me when it's all said and done at the end of the year. So, but right now I mostly wanted to give Rylane a little bit of love.
Yeah, I see that. I've done that before, so I get it.
Let's, if my thoughts on John Wick 3 are polarizing, let's get polarizing.
Okay, now I know where you're going with this.
Let's talk.
I accidentally alluded to this one, didn't I?
Yeah, let's talk a little Paul Schrader, shall we? Master Gardener, my number 4 of the year. I love this movie.
I wish I saw it.
And I understand why people don't. I truly empathize with why people hate this movie. But it's those reasons why I find it so provocative and so compelling in its ideas. I do think the writing, if there's a knock on the film, I think the writing is a little more obvious. Like its symbolism, the voiceover narration that we get with this trilogy, this is the most obvious in terms of what Paul Schrader is trying to evoke from a symbolic or thematic perspective in terms of the journal entries and the voiceover narration. And maybe it's a little uneven. Now, I will say this as well. There's been a lot of pushback in terms of the dialogue and the verbal exchanges we get in this film. I don't see those criticisms, or at least I have a hard time embracing those criticisms. I think the dialogue and characters having conversation here is just as interesting and just as complex as what we got in the previous 2 movies. In fact, in that regard, I would take this head over heels what we got in the card counter.
I was going to ask, in this trilogy, is this your second favorite?
Easily my number 2. Yeah,
Gotcha.
easily my number 2. I did not like the card counter all that much.
That's right. Yeah.
Film I think is head and shoulders better than that movie. And while the writing, I do appreciate here, again, the complexity of it, the performances are very good. Primarily what makes this film so incredible to me is that it's this phenomenal companion piece to First Reformed, not quite as direct in terms of its religious undertones and symbolism. That's something that First Reformed did a much better job of. However, when you consider what Paul Schrader's doing here in terms of its religious undertones, its narration around seeds and how they're reaped, which is such a big motif in Christian text.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately what this film is doing is it is taking a character, it is giving us some revelations about him, and it is provoking questions around forgiveness and rebirth. Is there a line where forgiveness is no longer achievable? Is it possible for people to change? Is hope attainable for those whose identities have been sown with hatred much of their lives? Mm-hmm. Those are the questions at the core of this film. And from a fundamental Christian perspective, that's easy to answer. The ethos of biblical faith is that forgiveness is available for everybody, especially if you're white and male. But what does that reality look like? Or what does that look like in reality? And when you consider the revelations that Schrader poses here, it's going to take that idea and push it to its most extreme. And I find that really compelling, to the point where, yeah, you might hate it. You might absolutely hate those boundaries. But if we're going to talk about Christian faith, if we're going to talk about, what it means to be sown with hatred and trying to change, is it possible for someone to change? Should we even care? Should we even care? I've seen criticisms, questions posed around this movie around its central character, and I don't care because of who he used to be. And look, I get it. But when we're talking about forgiveness and humanity, like where are those lines drawn? Where on an individual point of view do you draw that line in the sand? That is what Paul Schrader wants to explore here, and I find that so incredible. I absolutely love it. So yeah, this is a film I adore.
I haven't seen it yet, so I can't comment on the film, but I can comment on something that you're saying, and I can't help but laugh. And maybe this is just me, more so than how other people would react, although I would hope that other people would have a similar reaction. There's nothing that gets me more excited to see a movie than someone saying, you might hate it. You might hate it.
And I get it.
I kind of wish more movies would do that, like kind of, really challenge you in that way and make you feel kind of, I don't know if offended is the right word, but put off, right? And Paul Schrader is very good at putting people off. And we've seen that on Facebook countless times, for better and mostly
but he does that here. For sure. He does that here.
But I kind of love when content is going to do the content being the film itself that's willing to do that, right? Because I think we need to be challenged a bit more. It's why I love a filmmaker like S. Craig Zahler, for instance. A very different filmmaker for sure, different aesthetics, but someone that's willing to challenge people in not too dissimilar ways. And I do respect Paul Schrader for sticking to his guns in that way.
Yeah, and I will say as well, I grew up with religion, and that might play a part of it. If this is a world, especially in the United States, if Christianity, whatever sect of Christianity, if you grew up in that environment in any sort of deep way, this film is going to evoke an ethos that you are so deeply familiar with. And then given where our country has evolved, especially over the last few years, when you see the revelations of Narvel in this film, like those worlds collide in such a compelling way. Like like Paul Schrader is absolutely throwing an atom bomb in terms of all of the complexities of what this country has experienced the last 5, 10, 15 years. And to see it explode the way it does, I think it provokes a lot of questions as it relates
Good.
to faith, as it relates to forgiveness, that I think is incredible.
Good.
And if you think people can change, I think there's a fun conversation to be had.
Wow, for a second I thought you were quoting Rocky 4 for a second. If I can change, everybody can change.
Well, who knows? Maybe that's Rocky. Maybe that's what he's evoking here too.
Maybe Paul Schrader should direct Creed 4.
That's what we're getting at here. Yeah. Anyway, Master Gardener, I really liked it a lot. It's my number 4.
I can't wait to watch it. It's on my list. I'm going to check it out this week, and I'm probably going to regret doing so because it might break my list. Because I'm actually a fan of Paul Schrader. I like a lot of his work as a writer and director. Even some of his early work, like Blue Collar, a very forgotten film, a wonderful movie there. His debut, I think, from 1977. Really good stuff.
All right, it is time to talk about coffee. Everyone's favorite drink.
You had an almost, dare I say, orgasmic sigh when you simply mentioned the word coffee. That just goes to show how much of an adult that we have both become, that we crave this kind of substance now.
No, I love it. And what makes coffee cults coffee so great, and I mean this 100% genuinely, it is so good. Like it is, we talk every week with Coffee Cult about how they use specialty grade Arabica beans, and they are stickler for quality. They don't take shortcuts. They don't use Robusta beans at all. They don't use defected beans to cheapen the coffee. Like it truly is fantastic. And this last week, just a whole nother level, because they offered a new Colombian coffee, and this coffee, I'm telling you, it is absolutely stunning. This new coffee they have, it's this new Colombian IPE. It's on their website, coffeecult.com. You'll see it right there on the homepage. This is a limited edition coffee, by the way. Like you have to buy it now. As soon as supplies are up, like that's it. It's over. But I had a cup of this today.
I need it.
It's so good. I had a cup of this today, and you talk about having an orgasmic reaction. I nearly fell over with how good this coffee is. Like,
oh my gosh.
It was so good.
It just releases any stress or negative energy that you're carrying, right? And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, I mean, this specific coffee has notes of peach and red apple. It has these incredible fruity notes. It's very, very well balanced in its body and its in its acidity. I could not recommend it enough.
Coffee and art,
check it out.
They are synonymous with each other. They really are. We don't often talk about how, we do every time we talk about Coffee Cult, how great that their product tastes, but we don't often emphasize it as much as I think we should, right? I've tasted the Sumatra before. Okay,
Sumatra's great. I love
great.
that as well.
That bag is empty. I'll tell you right now, that bag's already empty.
We'll have to get you another bag. Yeah,
maybe this Colombian limited
it's
batch
good.
is what I need.
Yeah.
I really think I need it.
Yeah, no, it's really, really great. I cannot recommend it enough. And if that's, that in and of itself is fantastic. But on top of that, Coffee Cults, they ethically source their coffee. They only work with farms that pay their workers equally and fairly, especially their women workers. Yeah. They roast to order, so your coffee's not just sitting around in a warehouse. Like, they wait for you to order. That's when they roast it. That's when they ship it out. So it's guaranteed fresh every time. And use our code ISF. That's coffeecult.com, coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. Use our code ISF and get 15% off. Go try that Colombian coffee, get 15% off. I promise you're going to get addicted to it. It is so good. It's almost going to, it's like a cheat code in some ways. Like, this coffee,
it's gonna spoil you. Yeah. So anytime you want convenient coffee from somewhere else, you're just gonna taste garbage, basically, at this point.
Absolutely. And it's not like those flavored coffees that use chemicals and stuff that's just not good for you.
Not artificial.
That a lot of other companies use, which is utterly artificial. No, like, these fruity notes are organic. It's just how the coffee is processed. It's specialty grade, and it's how it's roasted. Like all of those things come together and render a beautiful coffee you're going to love. So again, that's isfcoffeecult.com. The InSession Film Podcast is brought to you by our great friends over at First Time Watchers. And Brendan, right now we're talking about our top 5 movies of 2023 so far. And I got to say, if you go to listen to First Time Watchers, they probably haven't seen any of these movies. And they're certainly not talking about them because
they're too busy
what they do.
They're too busy watching Critters or something like that.
That's why you got to love them, right?
Yeah, but I will say, at least for those of us who we do our own film podcast, that means we listen to a lot of other film podcasts. If we were to, compile our top 5 favorite film podcasts out there right now, I'm sure we can find room for the First Time Watchers podcast. So I guess keeping in spirit to the mid-year celebration we're doing right now, let's do a mid-year celebration for the First Time Watchers podcast, a great supporter of our show. They're a podcast you have to check out, hosted by Tim, Walter, and Hermano. They know their movies, talking about the most obscure movies you might not think to talk about on any film-related podcast.
Like the 1986 film Critters. Like, who's
Yeah.
talking about that film aside from First Time Watchers? Probably nobody.
That's why this show needs to not end.
I
Where's
know.
the petition?
It's great.
Where's the
They need to continue.
Yeah, they really do. Their banter is really great. It's really entertaining. What's unique about their show, too, is that they pick movies like Critters to talk about in a mid-year section when most film podcasts are going to be doing their mid-year wrap-up like we're doing right now. We're just simply playing the game, JD. We're we're
playing along.
We're doing what everyone else is doing. We're not being very inspired as a film podcast right now. The First Time Watchers boys, they're making us look bad by talking about Critters instead of doing a mid-year report or something along those lines. And that's what makes their show really interesting, by talking about movies that they've never seen before, giving it a real fresh and modern perspective. But they will talk about, at least briefly, some modern movies that they've caught up with that are worth noting, and maybe even some new trailers that are worth noting as well.
Yeah, they give out some great recommendations at the end of their show that I would urge you to pay attention to. And overall, the show is very smart. It's intuitive. It's a top 5 podcast in our
Absolutely.
hearts.
Yeah.
So with that said, Brendan, where can you find them on the internet?
You can check them out at firsttimewatchers.podbean.com. That's first with an F, F-I-R-S-T spelled out. firsttimewatchers.podbean.com. You can also hit them up on Twitter at First Time Watchers. Also search for them on Facebook, First Time Watchers, or on Instagram. They're also active there, posting their episodes on Podbean as well. Also, you can find them on Instagram at First Time Watchers.
And I believe they are also on Blue Sky. So if you're there,
everyone's making the move, the Blue Sky move. Yeah.
It is funny that they decided to end their show, and that's when Twitter went to hell. I don't.
So basically, they broke Twitter. They broke Twitter.
I think they did.
Is Elon Musk employed by the First Time Watchers? Is this all
question mark? Yeah, who knows?
I doubt that. That's diminishing their quality by a lot. So sorry, Tim. We're not trying to do that.
Yeah, no, this is a great show, though. Go check them out. Leave them a review on Apple or Spotify. At the end of your review, we ask that you leave a little hashtag so they know we sent you to them. And this week, we can just go with the hashtag Tim's Critters.
Tim, he is a critter. He certainly is a critter.
Yeah. One of those hashtags I think will be perfectly adequate.
Yeah.
Go check them out. We promise you'll love them. Again, that's First Time Watchers.
Getting into my number 3. JD, I'll be shocked if this isn't in your top 5. So maybe this might be a chance. Well, I was shocked before, but this one I'll be genuinely shocked if it's not in your top 5. I think it's going to be everyone's number, I don't know, somewhere in their top 3s. But that's Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So you're nodding. I don't know what that means, but
should I just reveal it?
If you want, if it's in your top 5, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I have this at number 2.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. So maybe we can talk about it collectively just to save some time here.
Sure.
But I do love this one, and I'm liking it more as time goes on, simply just due to the audaciousness of it. Like sitting there in the theater and just how overwhelming that the film was, how exciting it was. You felt like it was a film that was taking chances as a sequel, right? Regardless of the medium that it exists in, regardless of the genre it also exists in. It just felt like a very experimental and exploratory movie that kind of felt pretty special, honestly. I can't wait to watch the film again to really peel it apart, pick up on a few jokes or a few hidden messages that I didn't pick up on the first go around. And apparently there are many of them, because from what I've heard, there are different versions of the movie
there's like
playing.
several versions of this movie.
Yeah.
Wow.
I hear those different versions are pretty I hear there's subtle differences. It's not like the different
nothing
endings to
extreme.
Clue or something like that. Remember when that happened
Yeah,
in the 80s?
exactly.
Yeah, it's nothing like that. But I'm at a point now where I can say that I do think this is perhaps the second best feature Spider-Man movie ever made, just behind Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. I do think it is something special. Really, it mostly comes down to those final 40 minutes, which are constant climax. It came to a point where I did not know where the film was going to end. I think it ends kind of perfectly, if I'm being honest. It feels like a point that's exciting to get to the next chapter, but I still feel like arcs were concluded. I still feel like we were told a complete second chapter that felt more like a part 2 of a trilogy as opposed to a part 1 of a 2-part ending, that's why I don't love the whole billing of it as a part 1, because I really don't think that's fair. I think that's disingenuous. This feels more like a singular part 2 of a 3-part story to me, which I love about that. I think that's a great thing about it. And the way that it crystallizes certain arcs while leaving certain things dangling in a very like deconstructionist way regarding the ethos of Spider-Man and what it means to accept responsibility. This film really takes advantage of that notion beautifully. So there's a lot to say about it that I think is wonderful, not just aesthetically, but also topically. So I'll leave it there because I know you have more to say about it, but I think the film I think it's constantly getting better the more I think about it.
Yeah, no, I love this. As I noted, this is my number 2 of the year so far. And I talked to death about the visuals in our review of this when it came out. And I still maintain essays will be written on just the visuals of this film alone, and
I agree
what they mean for these characters and how it all changes, the various styles. There's, I don't know, a dozen different styles of animation here. It's insane, but it's all so seamless. And I love how it changes as the mood of the film changes, as the emotion changes for these characters, especially for Gwen. I think about those moments with her dad on her home world. So striking emotionally and visually, and how those two things are working congruently with one another. I also think about, as you were just noting there, how the choices of these characters, what that means in terms of Spider-Man lore and responsibility. How the film deconstructs that when you consider fate and how the timeline is connected to these tragic events. And what does that mean for Miles when he's looking at the larger picture and some of the sacrifices that he's willing to make, and how that perhaps changes other characters here as he begins to delve into that ethos a little bit. I just find all of that so engrossing. I love how the film gets into that with these characters. It's really funny. There's a lot of fun to be had here. The new characters they introduce are great. We talked about its central villain, the villain of the week, that ends up being actually quite extraordinary.
The transition first off, Jason Schwartzman, the voice of the Spot, right? Wonderful voice performance as well. And I think he deserves credit for the transition that character as a villain goes through, because I don't think I've ever seen a transition like that from like just comedic background villain to the most sinister and frightening thing I think I've seen in a movie in a while. And somehow like it kind of makes sense. Like that trajectory doesn't feel forced or jarring. It's really efficient. I'm astounded by that transition.
I agree. I think all of that is excellent. Spider-Punk is just one of the coolest characters I've ever seen in
yeah.
an animated movie.
Which
or
I
in a
did not,
Spider-Man movie.
which I did not know was Daniel Kaluuya while watching it for the first time until after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Pavatar, I think, is great. I love the humor of that character. The whole chai tea thing was incredible. Like,
What a great gag.
I love that. And even Miguel and Peter, even though they're functioning as the antagonist to Miles here, I think the film does such a great job of bringing credence to their motives when you tether that back to Spider-Man lore and responsibility. Like, it makes sense that they would choose what they do because the tragedy of what happened to them has utterly defined who they are.
Yeah.
And taking that away, what does that mean for them? So I kind of love that. Like, this is a film that offers some great complexity while at the same time bringing up that idea with Miguel and Peter. It doesn't undermine Miles either and what he's choosing, like what he believes to be the right thing. Like, there's understanding from both of those perspectives. And yeah, I just love it. Like, this film comes together so brilliantly, and yeah, I can't wait to watch it again. Can't wait to get into it and to look for nuances that I certainly missed the first time around. But yeah, I love it quite a bit.
I think it's going to get better with time. I think it's one that repeated viewings are just going to be kind to it. I think they're going to be kinder to it as time goes on. I think it's a special movie, and I felt something while watching it for the first time. The second that the to be continued came up on screen was like this emotional release, right? I felt so nervous watching this movie when it gets to those final minutes. But that's a sign that a movie is escalating in the right way to reach its proper destination. Like, it doesn't happen very often that you're just like, it's this constant build to something that I was almost ready to just stand up. It was so tense. That's really good storytelling there.
Nominate Daniel Pemberton for an Oscar.
Oh, that score. Oh, that score.
Nominate Daniel Pemberton for an Oscar. I will keep saying this all year. It is so good. One of the best scores of the year.
That score is
fantastic.
Amazing. So good.
Love that movie.
So do you want to get to your number 3 now? I guess since you already just talked about your number 2 and I just talked about my number 3 being Spider-Man.
Unless you want to talk about your number 2 first, and then I'll talk about my number 3.
Wow, that's not confusing at all.
Nope.
You know what? How about this? You talk about your number 3 just to keep at least some level of chronology going, okay. I guess. And then I'll continue on with my number 2, and then we'll just, I guess, skip your number 2. We'll do it that way.
All right, sounds good. My number 3, my beloved Wes Anderson. Asteroid City.
I knew this would be on your list somewhere. This is your placement of John Wick Chapter 4 is my placement of Asteroid City. Yeah, so it's my number 6.
I love this. I just put out a video review of this on our YouTube page if people want to go see it. Of course, Brendan and I have a podcast review of this as well, where we go more in depth on it. But yeah, the more I talk about this movie, the more I think about it. This is easily top 5 Wes for me. And as we noted in that podcast review of it, like I think we are distinctly in a new era of Wes Anderson that is more experimental, that's more somber in tone. You know, because the one thing that we didn't really get into in the podcast that I did talk about in my video review is that not only is Wes experimenting with not just Asteroid City, but also the French Dispatch in terms of structure and how that complements his aesthetics. But the French Dispatch also is a film that is built around somber poignancy.
Yeah.
And obviously Asteroid City is a lot of that as well. There's so much about the film in terms of longing and connection, our place in the universe. The film certainly has its humor, and I do love that about Wes here. It's more dry and subtle than what we typically get with Wes, but he does have his fun. But this is a film that is deeply concerned with the longing of these characters, how they come together through some sort of loss or feeling of isolation, and they're in the middle of a desert. Like Asteroid City is this small little pocket, this township in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's like
So
it's like
they're
it's like
very
Wes trying to
literally-
challenge himself because he normally likes things very bountiful and cluttered, you know, a
Yeah.
lot of stuff on screen. And yet I'm going to make a movie that's primarily in a desert where there's nothing around.
There's nothing.
Yes.
There's absolutely nothing. So there's a tangible isolation, a literal isolation to these characters as well. And because of the story here, the events that unfold, they're forced to be here. Like they can't leave.
Yeah.
Like they have to
Yeah.
spend an entire week in this isolation, and that just compounds that loss and this connection that they're all yearning for. And to me, that's why I push back so heavily against that idea that Wes is nothing but style and there's no substance to his films. Like that is like a hollow, superficial take that I just cannot agree with. Like when you really dig into his movies,
that's just a
there's
sad thing to say.
Incredible texture that I think is incredible. And even if you remove the emotion of what we see in these characters, and I think that comes through palpably in the performances, and that's another thing, right? Because Wes has been nominated for Oscars 3 times for writing. Like he's known just as much for his writing as he is his dollhouse aesthetic.
Sure.
But this isn't a film reliant on writing. The writing that is here is lavishing. It's really good, but there's much less of it. There's a lot of time where the camera just lingers on these characters and they have to invoke that feeling of isolation or that feeling of longing in these internalized performances. And they're all really excellent in their own ways. But I also think about the structure of this film. It's this play within a movie. There's black and white for the stage, the actual stage play. There's these yellow and blue saturated hues for what takes place in Asteroid City. And I love how he's playing with cinematic language here as it relates to the stage and how it informs this play within a movie and what's really going on here as it tethers to writing and intention and interpretation and the muddling of those things. I just love. So yeah, this is a new era of Wes. I think he's evolving right before our eyes. And as far as I'm concerned, this is easily one of the best movies of the year. And my number 3.
Yeah, I do think it is one of the best movies of the year, and I have it at number 6, and it's kind of a placeholder placement of it, because as we talked about during our podcast review of it, this is the one I can imagine rising the ranks as time goes on. Because there's a lot of density to this one. This is probably the most revealing of Wes Anderson's movies, the one with the most hidden layers to peel back, which might say it's one of his most artful movies for those reasons. And I love that about it. There's a surprising sense of melancholy to this one that I don't think the marketing is tapping into. They're tapping into it being yet another Wes Anderson movie. And it certainly is that, but it's also kind of not. Like this is the closest to the Royal Tenenbaums he has ever come since the Royal Tenenbaums. Which again, like I love that about him. And I think the Royal Tenenbaums is one of his best movies. So to see him tap into that melancholy once again, I think is astounding. And I can only imagine that if I watch the film again, I'm going to like it more. So yeah, I think it's a great movie. I think it's really good. Definitely one of the better movies so far this year. You already revealed your number 2 being Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So I guess I'll go ahead and reveal my my number 2, which I guess is not going to be
Guardians of the Galaxy.
It's not that. It's not that. You like that a lot more than I did. It's not showing. I did just watch that. I did just watch that prepping for this review, and I liked it. I didn't love it. I liked it. I think it might be lesser Kelly Reichardt, but I think it mostly sticks the landing. That ending slaps.
That ending is great. Yeah,
that ending the fact that it just ends is like, wow. I'm going to be thinking about this one now. I really like the movie. I think
it's quintessential Kelly Reichardt, but I could certainly see why it doesn't have the universal appeal as some of our other movies, but
no, and it doesn't quite have the same narrative propulsion I mean, that's a weird thing to say for Kelly Reichardt because most of her movies don't
I was gonna
have
say.
any narrative propulsion. But
that's why it feels so Kelly Reichardt to me.
Yeah.
Like it's reminiscent of Old Joy
Yeah.
in that way,
Well,
I guess. But
I could see that, yeah. But again, like a lot of those other films of hers, I feel like we're getting on a bit of a tangent with Kelly Reichardt. But I
We're
think it's
going
worth
down the rabbit
talking
hole,
about. It's
yeah.
worth talking about. We can segment this portion out and review and release it separately. I'm okay with that. But the way Showing Up, I think, differs from some of her other films is that a lot of her other films tend to depict close-knit relationships between a small group of people, whereas Showing Up is really one person and the way she relates to many people. So there are many
Yeah.
different characters coming and going, and I think that's why I have it ranked as low as I do with regard to Kelly Reichardt's filmography, because it's just something I wasn't ready for. It's a very different type of framing device for her as far as
Yeah.
the way characters come and go like that. I felt like some were well integrated while others not so much. There's a moment where really the moment where the film takes off for me is when she starts to develop this relationship with a wounded pigeon.
yeah.
And I started to
Yeah.
think, okay, is this going to become another Wendy and Lucy all of a sudden?
Yeah, it did kind of invoke that a little bit.
Yeah, but it kind of invokes a lot of different character banters that her films have, had over the years. In some ways, it's almost like a Kelly Reichardt buffet of sorts. And
Yeah.
maybe it is a little too cluttered in that regard, but I still think it's a very effective movie about a struggling artist and a narcissistic artist, right? So I think it's pretty interesting in that regard.
Yeah, no, I really love it a lot. I think there's a lot to the film as far as being an artist and how that relates to distractions and mundanity. There's this interesting juxtaposition between Lizzie and Joe, and how they're two friends, but also couldn't be further apart from each other.
I
in
did
terms of
like their
personality.
dynamic. Yeah, I did like
it's-
their dynamic. If anything, where the film got a little distracting for me is when we spent some time with Lizzie, her name is, when we spent some time
Yeah.
with Lizzie and her day job as an assistant at an art school, which admittedly isn't much of the movie, but I preferred when Michelle Williams was just simply commanding the screen. And there are times like when Andre Benjamin shows up, who's kind of wasted in the movie. If you, I felt like I would have loved to see a little bit more from him. But yeah, there's so many characters coming and going. I'm not sure if the balance was just right. But there are moments like with Joe, for instance, played by Hung Chow. I think that dynamic is wonderful. I think it's great and it's kind of funny. There's a lot of humor in this movie that I think is really great.
Yeah.
I have this movie at number 10 in my top 10 right now.
I have it at number 9. Yeah.
Okay, so we're not too far off, I guess. But I do think it's very good. I mean, I've never disliked a
really
Kelly
liked it a
Reichardt
lot.
film, so it's to say it's one of her lesser films means it's still one of the better movies of the year. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's
At any
very
rate.
that's a very long-winded transition to say my number 2 of 2023 thus far is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret.
Oh, okay.
Which I almost put as my number 1 because I think it's the most rewatchable film of the year for me. Selfishly, I just have a soft spot for these kinds of movies, coming of age films like this, especially ones that take place in a decade from long ago. In this case, 1970, I think, is when it's introduced, and it has that really great like brown hue to it that feels like it's trying to aesthetically take you back in time. It really feels very transportative in that way. I love that about it. It's a very funny movie. I think Kathy Bates is hilarious in it. Really what sticks out for me about the movie and what I love so much about it is not just the whole coming of age aspect of it, especially from a point of view that we don't often see nowadays, that being a young female adolescent. But the way it taps into religion, I think, is very necessary. The way it challenges the notion of religion and different denominations of religion.
Yeah.
And how it creates a very closed-minded environment, unfortunately, especially among family members. You know, we talk a lot about nowadays with the social climate being what it is. It's really hard to have these kinds of civil conversations, whether it be around religion or social issues or even politics, without feeling like you have to kind of fight the person, right? And it's unfortunate that you can't have reasonable conversations about these things. And one of my favorite quotes of the entire year comes from this movie, and a lot of it, has to be credited to Judy Blume because it most likely exists in her source material of this classic story.
Yeah.
Is what I learned about religion is that it makes people fight.
Yeah.
I just it's a wonderful, simple, but so heavily truthful quote.
Yeah.
And I think the film is wonderful at tapping into that idea while also just being a very entertaining coming of age film that I just really respond to. It's honestly my type of movie, and I think Kelly Freeman Craig does a really good job, like she did with Edge of 17, tapping into that mindset, making for a very entertaining movie. So really great stuff. I think I like it a little bit more than you, but I do think it's one of the best films of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I really like this. I have it ranked 4 out of 5 stars, I think, on Letterboxd.
Yeah. So I'm
which
guessing
for
it's
me
somewhere
is-
I'm guessing it's somewhere in your top 10, right?
I have this at number 10. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll be honest though, my 5 through 10 I didn't wrestle with quite as heavily. So I could
Basically, you're
shake that
saying
up a little bit.
it's basically 5A through 5G.
Basically. Yeah. And I really like this film quite a bit though, and I agree with everything you're saying in terms of religion, how that's such a big part of Margaret's journey here. And I think what's so heartbreaking about it, because I don't think, and this gets into a much larger philosophical discussion, but
Yeah.
religion in and of itself doesn't have to be a bad thing. However, I think this film is incredible in terms of exactly what you're talking about and how it often becomes a problem because the universal truths that often are at the core of these religions, they become secondary to other factors.
They become secondary to the practice of that religion or that specific
Yes.
subset of religion.
Yeah,
And
and
that's an unfortunate
specifically
thing.
in this case, it's Margaret has to be on my side of the aisle. And then
Yeah.
it becomes about ego and it becomes about pride and everything that religion often teaches against. That becomes the focal point.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking because Margaret enters into these different religious sects with an open-mindedness. Like she wants to try to be, she goes to the forgive me, I don't know exactly the terminology, but she goes to like the Jewish service with her grandmother.
Temple.
The temple. She tries out the Christian church. She does the Catholic thing for a moment. Like, and she does all of this with sincerity. She wants to hear from God and finds nothing in the process that can really help her out. And because of what we just talked about in terms of ego and pride, at the end of it, for her, religion just becomes nothing but a giant mess that fosters, as you said, fighting and conflict.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that so many of us can so deeply relate with.
I do love this movie, and I don't mean to make a joke out of what we're talking about here, but one of my favorite reviews of this movie is on Letterboxd, and it's from our good friend Jay Ledbetter, where he wrote a quote from the movie, and I think he said, "Why, God? Why do I only feel you when I'm alone?" And then he said, "What is this? A Terrence Malick movie?" It's only further proof that our good friend Jay has a real way with words sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I do love that, but the voiceover narration here, if you were to make it more poetic and elegant, like
It
if
is
she was
kind of
to-
Malickian, yeah.
It is a little Malickian. Yeah, he could totally make that work. You would just have to phrase it a little differently or say it a little differently. But I do love that about this film. And then there's also just the coming of age aspect of it, which is a lot of fun. There's some conflict, some drama there, but the film also has this joy to it that's really great too. And I just love the dynamic of all these characters. So
Absolutely.
I'm a big fan.
All right.
Number
And
one.
you said-
I assume we share the same number.
We
one
have
here.
the same number one. Let's just talk about past lives right
Past
now.
lives.
Yeah.
So also I want to know before we get into this that Brendan and I do have a podcast review of this that is already recorded.
Yes.
It is ready to go. It'll go live probably a day after this show goes live. So just again, stay tuned, subscribe to YouTube or to your podcast app of choice, however you listen to the show, because that is coming very soon. We have a really great in-depth conversation on it. So I don't know if we have to go too much into it.
No,
here,
I just want people to listen to that review we did of it, because I feel like
Yeah.
we really got deep into why this is a very special movie. We're no contrarians here. I feel like this is kind of the common
it's
favorite of the year for
the
those of us in our
consensus number
critic
one.
circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely the consensus number one, but I do think it is a very special movie. I just, much like I talked about with Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, I have a soft spot for coming of age films like that. I also have a soft spot for romantic what if movies like Past Lives is. And I think this one is one of the more powerful ones. It's my jam. It's my jam. And I think this example of it is as close to perfect as we're going to get in the modern era of films like this. I think the framing device is perfect. I think the performances are perfect. I think the ending is perfect. We talked a lot about the final.
Yeah, that final scene is a
Yeah,
gobsmack.
interestingly, and we talked about it as a final scene, but it's really a final shot. It's an unbroken scene. And
That's
I
true.
don't think we really acknowledge that in our
other
review.
than there is an edit in the middle of it that I won't reveal here for spoiler reasons.
Yeah, true. Okay.
But
I mean, that edit is
so good.
It certainly
It's
feels
so
like
good.
that edit is interjected within an unbroken scene.
Yes.
For obvious thematic and emotional purposes that I think are very much earned. But we talked a lot about the ending and the nuances of it, the ambiguities it raises, the questions it raises with regard to our relationships in childhood and why they meant so much to us, and whether the crystallization of this relationship at the end of this particular movie is a happy one or a devastating one, or if it's somehow both. It kind of is both in many ways. Like, this is a great example of a what if movie that's able to have its cake and eat it too. And I cannot believe it's a directorial debut. Celine Song is going to have, I at least hope she has a bright future ahead of her, and it keeps making movies as assured as this one is.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, the confidence of this film is absolutely astronomical. It's really great. And I agree with you. The performances, the writing here, the editing, the score of this film even is
great,
quite excellent as well. But I do love the framing of it and how Celine Song gets into the relationship of our essential characters here, how childhood friendship is such a big part of it. And anyone that listens to the show knows what that means to me. And by the end of it, it is all about them finding some sort of closure, which I've already talked about on this show more than once. So imagine how much we get into it.
Wear those shirts, man. I just want the closure InSession Film shirts now.
I know. I've got to figure out a design around that. But
we'll get there.
It's quite excellent. And I do love the emotion of this film, but maybe more so than the emotion itself, or even the ideas around childhood, around closure. That on its own terms is great, but it's how the film goes about examining those things here is wonderful, because there's a practicality to it. Like, there's a commitment to realism in this film that I think is so clever and so exquisite when you get to the nuances of what's at play and the dynamic of not just those two characters, but there's a third character played by John Magaro in the film that is quite great. And on all three actors are wonderful. Greta Lee, Teo Yu, John Magaro, they are phenomenal. So yeah, Celine Song, a hell of a debut. We've seen quite a few striking debuts in recent years. So add Past Lives to the mix. It's going to end up being one of the year's best movies for sure.
One thing I want to acknowledge from a performance standpoint is, all three of these performances, whether it be Greta Lee or Teo Yu or John Magaro, like, all great. They're phenomenal. And we talked about all of them in our review that is available hopefully now, or soon to be available as you're listening to this. But with regard to Teo Yu, he plays someone that is very much disconnected from not just American culture, but even the English language, right? Yes. Isn't it really weird when you listen to interviews with these actors and they speak such fluent English then? That it's just so interesting. And this is someone, I didn't know this. He was born in Germany, of all places.
Oh, wow. How fascinating.
That's so fascinating. So it just like knowing that there is like this cultural disparity between the character that I feel like he's playing and maybe what we think his upbringing is, just goes to show how talented of an individual that he is to be able to tap into something like this. It's amazing, absolutely amazing.
He's really great. I mean, all three are fantastic. But yeah, we do get into Teo Yu's performance and why it's so heartbreaking, heart-wrenching in a lot of ways. I guess the last thing I'll add, because I didn't really mention this in the review and I wanted to, but we got sidetracked with all of its other greatness. I believe you briefly mentioned this because the opening shot of the film is compelling, right? Because it's this wide shot on the three of them together in this bar. And it's the only moment of the film where the perspective isn't on our central three characters. We hear this other couple that is at the bar. We don't see them, but we hear them. We see their point of view, and they're looking at this potential awkward situation, and they're trying to figure out what it is. Yeah, I do love that as an entry into this film that is then at the end of the movie recontextualized when we do understand what's happening there.
It turns us as audience members into that couple, perceiving them from a distance.
We're having that same dialogue for sure.
Yeah. I thought about that too, especially when we get to that final scene, or not the final scene, but the final scene at the bar between Teo Yu and John Magaro's respective characters.
Arthur,
when Arthur and Hai Sung, is that his name? Hai Sung, I think.
Hai Sung, yeah.
When the two of them are talking together and there is this language disparity between them, you also see a couple in the background, right? And my first thought was, I wonder if that's the couple we overheard. But again, little details like that cue us in on different forms of observation that the film is getting at. Credit to Celine Song for being that attentive to those details.
So good. Love me some past lives. Should we reveal the rest of our list, our 6 through 10?
Let's do it. Yeah.
What do you got?
So at number 6, I already said this, Asteroid City, the latest from Wes Anderson. At number 7, I have Ben Affleck's Air. I think a really entertaining movie. And then I also have a rather similar film at my number 8, and that's Blackberry. A procedural historical film of sorts about the creation of something in a business setting.
Can I speak to this real fast?
Go for it.
And this is a little bit of a side tangent, but it's relating to Blackberry. So, I could not believe how hockey centric that movie is. I did not understand or realize that walking into it.
We really should have reviewed it on a podcast episode or something.
I still think we should. I still think we should, even though we're late to the game. But
if history serves us, properly, movies that have a hockey centric background tend to do well on our YouTube channel, because one of our most popular reviews is the movie Close.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and what's interesting about it, and I didn't really make this connection when watching the movie because it's called Blackberry. I anticipated that we'd be watching a movie about Blackberry, and we do primarily. However, what I remember about the 2005-ish time frame is that the Pittsburgh Penguins were up for sale. And there was a huge rumor that they were going to move. And so I remember that in real time, and this guy from Blackberry, how he's involved. Like I remember that pretty vividly. And ultimately, because there were other bidders beside him, obviously. But there were rumors that Pittsburgh was going to be moved, and it's one of the biggest conspiracy theories to this day in NHL circles, because the rumor was Pittsburgh's moving, and all of a sudden they win the draft lottery, and who did they win? Sidney Crosby. That's who they win in that NHL draft, and all of a sudden, we're staying in Pittsburgh. It's amazing how that works. And if not for Crosby, they might have moved. So
all of a sudden, they have a new captain on their hands. Then,
So anyway, that's like a fun merging of two different worlds, because I remember that in real time. Yeah, and I never really knew the behind the scenes of how this guy from Blackberry was involved. And to me, it's just funny that the movie actually gets into that. Like there's a meeting with Gary Bettman in this movie, which is wild.
There is a parallel movie and a parallel story you can tell of what you're talking about there, right? You can
Oh,
create
for
like
sure.
you can create a
100% there is.
you can
Yeah.
create like a side sequel of sorts to Blackberry about the hockey side
Just
of the
the
story with
NHL
the
part of
Pittsburgh
it. Yeah.
Penguins specifically.
Honestly,
right?
it's just as compelling.
Yeah.
It's just as interesting.
Yeah, it basically works as a companion story. Yeah, it really does. But anyway, yes, that is my number 8 of the year. I think it's a very good film. At number 9, I have the documentary Still, a Michael J. Fox movie, which I'm not sure if you've seen yet. It's available
No, I haven't.
I think it's on Apple TV Plus, if I'm not mistaken. It's a very brave documentary. It's based on Michael J. Fox's own memoir, and really gets into his experiences battling Parkinson's at such a young age. But it's really the filmmaking and the editing that I think are so crucial to telling that story effectively, because it mixes his own personal struggles with sequences from Family Ties or Spin City or Back to the Future. Like, it somehow finds scenes from those properties and almost creates a narrative around them while still fabricating a few things from a storytelling standpoint and forms of recreation, but it's really inventive in that regard. So I think it's a very good documentary tackling that. And to close this out, I think I mentioned earlier, number 10 is Kelly Reichardt's Showing Up. So that closes out my top 10 there.
Okay, good stuff there. For my 6 through 10, as I mentioned earlier, John Wick Quattro at my number 6. Here's a little bit of a twist, if you will, at number 7, Knock at the Cabin. M. Night Shyamalan.
I have that at number
in my
12.
top 10.
I have it at number 12.
I really like Knock at the Cabin, and I will die on the hill. I love the ending to that movie.
It's good.
I think it's really good, and I think M. Night gets to have his cake and eat it too. And it's also interesting in the context of this conversation, which I did not anticipate. However, I talked about Master Gardener and its religious undertones and symbolism. I got into that a little bit. Then we talked about Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, and its religiosity. And here we are with another one. Like, for whatever reason, like, Christian fundamentalism is seeping its way into all of these movies this year, or at least the films that are in my top 10.
I feel like a theme is a brewing here.
A theme is a brewing, because honestly, that is some of the best elements of Knock at the Cabin. Like, I
like it. Yeah, I like
love
it.
how the film subverts, Christian salvation and who that is typically for, and what that actually means to Knock at the Cabin, and how it kind of is the opposite of what you would expect. I think is incredible.
Yep.
Do love that. Number 8 for me is the Sundance winner, 1001. Similarly to Blackberry, I think that's one that, even though we're late on, we could probably get into that. In fact, it has one of my favorite supporting performances of the year, and also a contender for scene of the year for me. It comes from that one.
Okay.
So
That's a
that
solid
is
sure.
certainly one that we could get into once you catch up with that one as well.
Okay.
As I noted earlier, at number 9 for me is Showing Up. And at number 10, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. I do want to throw out a few others, though, as well, that I like
Same here.
that just missed this list, because Blackberry is on there. Error is on there. There's a little film called Blue Jean that came out that I highly recommend.
Oh, yeah. I haven't seen
liked
that one
film a
either.
lot.
Yeah.
That one's at number 11 or 12 for me. And then there's a new film, an Icelandic film that is out on Criterion Channel, of all things, but its actual release date was just a few weeks ago, or maybe this last week, but it's a movie called Godland. And
Heard of
the
it. Yeah.
imagery, the cinematography of that movie is so incredible. And I'm trying not to regurgitate what I told Jay Ledbetter, because it's a little too crass for this podcast here. I will say this, though. If you're a fan of cinematography, that movie is a must watch. You don't even have to watch the movie. You don't have to listen to it. Turn down the sound and just look at it. It is visually stunning. Absolutely every frame of that film is engrossing. But what makes the cinematography all the more I guess compelling is that the striking imagery is actually a big part of what that film is commenting on thematically.
Okay.
Like it's not just there to look pretty. Like those images have a deeply symbolic aspect to it as well. That is subverted in these really incredible ways by the end of that movie. So it is easily the winner for best cinematography this year. It's not even close. Wrap that one up. Let's just take that category to the bank right now. It is done.
That is a
over.
selling point. That's a selling point right there.
It's done. It's one thing to look great. It's another thing that the greatness of the images, the evocative nature of it is thematically nuanced as well. My issue with the film really is more so in its narrative rhythms, its characterization. I'm still wrestling with it. I could come around on that film and it could end up being in my top 5 of the year. That's really the only thing that's keeping it outside my top 10 at this point. I'm still wrestling with it from that angle, but my God, it is worth watching just for the imagery alone. So anyway, I wanted to talk about that one.
Well, I think that's a great point there. It's one I definitely want to catch up with for those reasons. As far as a few others that we really like from this year, this is a movie that you and I reviewed together. And I know we both really liked it. I have it at number 13, and that's How to Blow Up a Pipeline.
Yes. Yeah, I like that one a lot.
Yep. A bit of a surprise one. I've always been sticking with this one because I thought the experience of it was just so entertaining. But my number 11 is Scream 6.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah. I thought that film was really entertaining. Yeah, I think it's actually one of the better Scream films as far as it, of the 6 of them. I think it's at least in the upper half, maybe 3 or 4 or something like that. There are a few others I want to acknowledge that I at least enjoyed in some way. The anime film Suzume, or Suzumi, I believe it's actually how it's pronounced. I didn't love it. We were kind of critical about it when we talked about the film on our review, especially narratively speaking. But there's so much about it, musically and aesthetically, and just from an overall animated vibe. That I think is really cool. There's a lot to like about it, and I know you were big on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, at least comparatively to me, but I still have that in the realm of my top 20 at this point.
Yeah, that's at 13 for me, something like that.
Yeah. But there was still a lot of good stuff here. So a lot of stuff that I didn't love. We don't have to talk about the Flashes or the Shazams of the world or the Cocaine Bears of the world or the Ghosteds of the world.
Yeah. I will throw this out there as well. I like the film. I don't love it, but I wanted to mention the film Tetris because it has one of my favorite scores of the year. Even if you
I like it, don't love it. But
even if you don't see the film, go listen to the score on Spotify. You'll enjoy it. It's really, really good. Really great stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, with that, should we get to the poll, Brendan?
Let's go ahead and get to this week's poll and ask everyone out there what their favorite film of the year was.
It's real bad. Okay? I don't like those numbers at all.
Just one poll? Those things aren't scientific.
Yes, they are. All this is science. This is math.
So we wanted everyone out there to contribute to this conversation, right, JD? We just gave our favorite films of the year thus far. We asked everyone out there, what is your favorite film of the year thus far? And the results are not surprising, JD. They're really not surprising.
Okay.
Obviously, we talked about these 2 films that won the poll. I'm sure you can probably guess what the 2 films are. Just given
Past Lives and Past Lives.
No, but you at least got one of the 2 films that ended up in the top 2. Past Lives was number 2.
What? That one wasn't number 1.
It was
well,
not
the
number
John
1.
Wick 4 is the other one.
Nope.
No?
Oh, come on. Where's your web slinging brain at right now?
Okay. Across the Spider-Verse.
Yeah,
I had a brain fart. That's what that is.
You're good. I'm just.
It's late at night. I had to take care of 2 kids earlier.
You haven't had enough coffee cult to bring you
exactly. I need to substitute water for more coffee. That's the issue here.
I mean, that helps stimulate brain stimuli, right? So and anyway, but yeah, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse actually won the poll at 18.5%. Past Lives in second place at just under 15%. So there's the obvious response there, right?
Yeah.
Let's get to the most shocking aspect of this. The film that ended up in third place. Yeah. In third place here at just under 13%. So it only separated itself from Past Lives from 1 vote.
Knock at the Cabin.
Nope. Are you want to keep guessing? Or you want me to just get into it? Because
Infinity
I don't.
Pool.
No. I don't think you're gonna get it. I think this will take a little.
6.
Nope.
You know, eventually I'm gonna get to it when I.
Eventually, you're going to. You just keep if you just keep listing the
Evil Dead Rise.
Nope, not even. Oh, I hated
Dungeons
that
and
movie.
Dragons.
Nope.
I don't know. Asteroid City.
Nope.
John Wick 4.
Nope. This is getting fun.
Just trying to read through all. Which one haven't I said yet?
You're closing the gap.
Lane.
Nope.
Super Mario Brothers.
Nope.
1001.
Nope.
I'm pretty sure I've said them all. Asteroid City.
Nope.
I don't know. What is it?
Third place was How to Blow Up a Pipeline.
Oh, wow. Okay. I did not anticipate that.
I did not either. So I mentioned the results being unsurprising. I kind of fibbed. At least a third of those top 3 results were surprising.
Okay. Interesting.
That is very interesting. Yeah. We did get some votes here for Guardians Volume 3, a few here for Suzume, Dungeons and Dragons, Super Mario Brothers, Indiana Jones, and the Dial of Destiny actually got 2 votes, the same as Asteroid City.
Okay.
God. Thank you, JD. Thank you for that.
Yep.
The same
Sorry
number of
for-
votes there as John Wick Chapter 4 and Asteroid City and Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. So definitely some surprises here to be sure, but as far as the top 2 are concerned, I don't think that was a surprise at all.
No, not a surprise at all. Spider-Verse and Past Lives, that's my top 2.
Yeah. Slightly different
Reversed
order.
order,
But still,
but
I
yeah.
mean, it more or less the same thing there. And I feel like a lot of people out there would agree.
I was gonna say I don't know why I'm proclaiming that like those
It's
are
a problem
my
that
two,
it just-
and no one else has those. Like everyone on the planet has those films 1 and 2.
Like I said,
So-
we are no contrarians on this episode right now.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thanks to everyone that voted on the poll this week. Really do appreciate it. Before we get out of here, I want to say thank you to all of our patrons. Patreon.com/InSession Film is a great way to support us and help us out. Brendan and I, we need to get some bonus content to you guys soon.
Oh my
so
gosh, we do.
Be on the lookout for that. I'm not exactly sure what we're doing next week on the show. Mission Impossible? Something along those lines?
As far
maybe?
as movie related, so Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 will go wide on Wednesday, July 12th, which means that's an interesting one, JD, right? Because of when it's actually going wide. Should we talk about something tied to that next weekend, or should we save that for the weekend after that?
I think we should do it next week and lead up to Mission Impossible.
I think so. We'll do something, topically related to not just Mission Impossible, but maybe action movies in some way. I think that could be the topic there. Certainly gearing up for our review of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. But as far as other reviews and some main reviews you want to look out for, so July 7th, this coming weekend, we have the film Joyride coming out. Apparently that goes wide.
Very
So
much
that's something we
looking
will
forward to
be
that.
talking
Yeah.
about for sure.
Yeah, so be on the lookout for that. We currently have reviews up for Asteroid City and Dial of Destiny. And as we noted, Past Lives is coming very, very soon.
Yeah.
Depending on when you're listening to this, it might already be out. So you can go and check out reviews for all of that. Also, plug for Women in Session, their latest episode. They did a critic spotlight. This is going to be a series that they are going to continue, but they started with our very own Amy Thomason.
Yeah.
And we got to hear a lot more about her background and her history with film, why she became such a fan of movies and ultimately a critic. So you can go check that out. It was really great. Be sure to subscribe here on YouTube, like the videos, all that sort of fun jazz. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please subscribe to those. Leave us reviews there. You can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. We are now there. Just search InSession Film. And I believe that is it.
That is it.
Any other final thought, Brendan, before we get out of here?
I am really looking forward to the rest of the year because we know what kinds of films are coming out for the rest of 2023. There's a lot to look forward to. Big films from big directors, small indie films from directors we admire. I have no idea where this year is going to end up, but I think it's an exciting one. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being one of those cases where we say 2023 is a great year for film, but it wasn't that way initially. Like it had to work its way towards it, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to recall maybe 2018. I know that we've had this experience a couple times where 2013 was this way. Like the first half of the year maybe wasn't great. It was a little, we were lukewarm on the year, but by the end of it, it was like, oh my God. It was too much. It was overwhelming with how good the year is.
I'm trying to think about, and it was overwhelming in the sense that they just saved all of these heavy hitters for the back half of the year that ended up being some of the best films of that decade, right?
Yes, exactly.
I'm trying to think if there was another year more recently that had that same, I don't want to say problem, but had that same situation, right? What was the year that Parasite came out? That was 2019. Wasn't that was kind of a similar one, wasn't it? I feel like
I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, and the end of that year was striking,
stacked.
It was so stacked.
Yeah.
So I mean,
okay. I take it back. 2022, I think, was the one that was like that because a lot of these movies were, delayed because of the pandemic, so they were thrown out at the last. Or was that 2021? It was. I was
going to say 20. I had to be 2021 because we talked about 2022 earlier in the show.
Yeah, so it was 2021 where it was just like this overstacked back half of the year because so much of what came out was supposed to come out a year beforehand. So it's like we had 2 years worth of movies in 1 year. Then,
very much so. Yeah. Anyway, with all of that said. Stay tuned. We have a lot more fun. July is going to be a great month. I very much look forward to it. So
Barbenheimer.
We're all ready.
Or Oppenarby.
However, either way, it works either way. Can't wait for that. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Past lives. I was
just going to say, past lives.
So good.